Hello, my name is Serena Lindell, and today I'm going to be presenting my final presentation for ART100 on Cindy Sherman. Cindy Sherman was born in 1954 on the 19th of January and is still alive today. We talked about her already in class, but I was captivated by her artwork, so I decided to research her a little bit more. So about when and where her art was created, she didn't create any art in New Jersey or Long Island, but this is where she spent her childhood and where she was born. She then moved to Buffalo, New York, where she attended college at the University of New York, Buffalo, and she studied art. In 1977, after college, she moved to New York City, where she created the Untitled Film Still series. Many of these were taken in her studio apartment, and after she created these series, they were debuted at her first solo show at the Kitchen in New York City. And then around 1980, a lot of these dates I'm not exactly sure the exact dates, but around 1980 she spent time in Rome creating her history portraits that we'll look at today. And from 1990 to present, most of her time has been spent again in New York City. I think she has taken some trips around the world to create different art, and a lot of her art doesn't say exactly where it's created, but most of her art, from what I could tell from my research, was done in New York City. Some examples that we won't talk about much today are Sex Pictures, Office Killer, and Pecker. These were done around 1990 after History Portraits and Untitled Film Still series. So her family was not super supportive of her art. Her mother was a teacher and her father was an engineer. But she decided to go to college anyways with art. She began with a focus in painting and then switched to photography. In the 1960s, it was described as an eclectic time for art, for art in the art world. And Sherman felt that working with painting, she was kind of working in the shadows or the aftermath of this period of the 60s. And quoted in an artstory.org, Sherman says that there was nothing more to say through painting. So she moved to photography, and she took her first photography course and ended up failing it, but when she retook it, she actually fell in love with it. So, and still works through the medium of photography today. In 1984 to 1999, she was married to Michael Outer, who is a film director, and this is where she got actually involved in motion pictures. From the last slide, we see Office Killer and Pecker. This is motion pictures that she was involved in when she was with Michael Outer, who was this film director. In 1995, she received the MacArthur Fellowship, and throughout her life, I'm not going to go through all of them, but I thought I would put a little quote up with all of her awards and accomplishments throughout her life. She has very, very many, and this is from famousphotographers.net. So, for the important part, going through her actual art. So, we talked about the Untitled Film Still series in class, but this was her most famous artwork that she is really known for, and this is what she created right out of college in her studio around New York City in her studio apartment. And this series really plays on the ideas of the film industry in the 1960s and 70s and the representation of women in society, in film and in like magazines and commercials and things like that. So in this series she creates many different representations, or she plays on the many different representations of women in this time, but it's up to the viewer's interpretation to interpret what that representation is. She doesn't put titles on any of her her works and also doesn't give any description, so it's up to the viewer to make that interpretation. Um, I think the best way to describe Sydney Sherman and her work is through the word ambiguity. A lot of her work is ambiguous, and it's up to the viewer to up with the interpretation. So in this first image from the Untitled Film Stills, I think it's representing seductive and revealing women at the time, and how that wasn't okay in society, but also that's what you needed to be for men. So it's kind of that double standard, and how it's not okay to be seductive, but you can see on her face kind of that not knowing what to do, or kind of that perplexity. So that's my interpretation of this image, number 6. So I had 2 different ideas for this one of what I interpreted as. Cindy Sherman worked a lot with makeup, and the idea of makeup, and so I was thinking this piece was a representation of women and how we make our face, and once our face is, especially in the 1960s, once our face is put on, that's who we are, and the makeup and how we create we dress ourselves is who we are, and this image is showing that once it's gone, we're kind of broken. Once it's messed up, once she's crying, it's kind of broken. I also had the interpretation of drunkenness, and how that was how that was interpreted in the 1960s area. As you can see her glass on the counter, and it kind of looks like she's in a bar. Just the idea of how it wasn't okay to be a drunk, and the people who were drunks were a mess, with her makeup and her face. How if you were drinking alcohol as a woman, it was kind of, you looked kind of like a mess. I think Untitled Film Still number 3 is the idea of the housewife, which was huge in the 1960s, especially in the film industry and in the public. You can tell in her face that she's kind of searching for more as she's doing dishes, but this is what she was made to be, as a housewife, nothing more. Number 4, I think, represents the idea of the damsel in distress in this time. You can see she has a perfect exterior. Everything is very well put together in her outfit, her hair, and everything, but she's in distress. She looks like she's searching for more, and she's all alone in looking for that. I think it's playing on that idea that you would see a lot in the films in this time. So these next 2 portraits I'm going to be going through are part of the history portraits that she created in Rome. This series was playing a lot with costumes and making very bold representations of the original art. So she would take history portraits from history, like the one you see on the right, and make really obscure parodies of these original portraits. This portrait is playing on the one on the right of Judith. She made these portraits to appear kind of artificial and play on the representations of people, but also keep it ambiguous. Like I said, a lot of her art is ambiguous, so it's up for your interpretation. I wanted to mention here too that this was really working with her love for dressing up. I read that Sydney Sherman wished that every day was Halloween. She loved to dress up, so these history portraits really display that love for dressing up and putting on a new character to represent these old characters of history. This is another piece from the history portraits. This is The broad.org describes this portrait as a parody of the portrait painter and his model. So, and Sidney Sherman describes this portrait as an older Madame de Pompadour. So, kind of playing on those two things, parodying them. You can see the obscure foot slipping out under her dress, just kind of the obscurity and parodying the painter and his model. Um, and the Madame de Pompadour that I mentioned was the mistress of King Louis the 15th. So this was a representation of that person in history. And this also deals a lot with class, taste, and gender, putting them together, parodying them, and also contrasting them together. This was created in 1989. This is one of the pieces from her clown series. Her clown series was created right after 9/11 attacks and was made to describe the different faces and the different personalities behind the exterior. So as a clown usually dresses themselves up to be super, super happy. Maybe on the inside they're actually not. And this was a way to describe this through everyone in history, how we put our face on, but in that inside we're maybe not actually okay. And you can see this kind of with her sad eyes and the frown. And these are all Sidney Sherman dressing up. So that was what she was trying to represent with her clown series. And then this is one of her pieces created in 2019 that is her most recent portraits that she has created. This was the first time she involved men or the idea of men in her artwork. And this piece, along with the others in this series, was made to play on masculinity and what it means to be masculine. That we're dealing a lot with society right now, that question of what it means of masculinity, and also playing on queering the man. She worked a lot with drag queens and drag makeup in this in this series. So really playing on masculinity and what that means in our society. So in total, all of Sidney Sherman's art is really up to your interpretation, and really plays on ambiguity and representations of who we are. And yeah, thank you for listening.